Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening to those online. Thank you all for joining. Happy last day of World Water Week. My name is Sarah Walker. I'm the Director of Corporate Water Engagement at the World Resources Institute. And I'll be kicking us off today to talk about water quality benefit accounting, which aims to standardize methods for evaluating the water quality benefits of water stewardship activities. So I'll provide a brief overview of this effort, and then we'll hear about the water quality benefit accounting 5-step process and a bit more on the methods involved in the accounting methodology. We'll then hear some example applications for this accounting guidance and how it can be used by the private sector. We'll then have a panel with some of our corporate partners who will talk about their anticipated use of this forthcoming guidance. Then we'll have a short interactive activity. We were hoping to do breakout groups, but given this unique seating, we'll get you all on a Mentimeter kind of exercise. And then we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. And we are hoping to end 5 minutes early. We can get you all to lunch at a good time while some of us race across town to the epicenter for the next event. So this is the project team involved in the Water Quality Benefit Accounting Initiative. It's myself and Caroline Black from WRI, and you'll hear from Caroline later as she'll be moderating the panel. We're working together with the Nature Conservancy. We'll hear from Nabia Ofosuama, who will talk about the case studies, the example applications of the guidance. And then we're also working with this team here at Limnotech, and we'll hear both from Laura Weintraub and Derek Schlee, who will talk about the methods and lead us through the exercise at the end. We also have a number of wonderful corporate partners who are supporting this effort, and we'll hear from a few of them today on the panel. We also have a pretty large advisory group made up of others from the private sector, as well as government and academia and other NGOs who are helping to inform this effort. So for an introduction to water quality benefit accounting. So this effort was really born out of the need we were seeing in the private sector as companies are setting and trying to act on their corporate water targets. And most targets to date have been volumetric in focus. So if you look across the top of this figure, after targets are set, they're implementing actions on the ground to meet these goals. Back in 2019, WRI and Limnotech and other partners published volumetric water benefit accounting, which many of you may be familiar with. It's really become the industry standard for tracking progress, quantifying benefits from these volumetric-focused activities in the water stewardship space. There are some companies who are also setting or have set water quality targets. And there are others who have these volumetric targets and are doing projects primarily for volumetric benefits, but are also interested in capturing those co-benefits for water quality. But there has been no comparable resource on the water quality side of things to help quantify those benefits to enable the private sector to track their progress against their targets. So currently, the water quality benefits are not really being quantified or tracked in a consistent way. So we're hearing from the private sector that, this kind of guidance can help to provide a common methodology that's based on industry best practice that can be used to quantify and report on the water quality benefits of the projects that they're funding. And there's an interest in water quality benefit accounting guidance that covers a wide range of water quality parameters for both surface and groundwater and across a variety of landscapes. So the objective of this effort is to publish a standardized methodology to account for the project water quality benefits. And this will look at nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, sediment, temperature, metals, and bacteria. And it can be applicable for both agricultural and non-agricultural landscapes, including urban areas. And we'll hear from some of the corporate partners and Nabia on the case studies that'll cover a wide swath of these areas. So ultimately, we'll be publishing a guidance document in early 2024 that will provide this standard guidance for the private sector and really for others too, if you're other NGOs or watershed organizations involved in implementing activities on the ground and wanting to quantify the benefits of those. So here's a quick sneak peek of the contents of that publication. We'll provide, of course, some background for this initiative. The approach we took, there was a robust landscape assessment that went into this that looked at emerging water quality standards, the current landscape of corporate water quality targets, and things like that help to inform this effort. And then, of course, the bulk will be on the methods themselves, the 5-step process, and very detailed technical calculation methods depending on the activity types and the pollutants of interest. And Derek will get into that in a minute. We'll also touch on programmatic considerations, so things like how long can you claim benefits, for how many years, how do you allocate benefits of projects if multiple parties are involved in the activity, and guidance around kind of reporting and making public claims. And then we'll also include some case studies from our corporate partners that highlight how these methods can be applied in various contexts. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Derek Schlee at Limnotech, and he will dive a bit more into the process and the methods. One-way street.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And again, good morning, everyone. My name is Derek from Limnotech, and I'll be walking through a few of those middle chapters that Sarah just highlighted in the guidance document. Before I get into this 5-step process of applying the water quality benefit accounting methodology, I want to emphasize 3 different things up front. Number 1, we are still actively working on this, as Sarah indicated, so what I'll present today is still in draft format, so there might be some minor revisions between now and the final publication. Number 2, and this is an important one, going through a water quality benefit accounting process is much more than what you see in the middle box, simply gathering your inputs, picking a method, and arriving at your outputs, right? So you really have to make sure that the person applying WQBA fully executes each of these 5 steps so that they understand the local context, the local water quality situation, understand exactly what's happening on the ground or will happen on the ground with the project activities and who's involved, then go through the nuances of making the right assumptions, choosing the right inputs, and picking the right method, as well as the right water quality indicators. As Sarah just talked about, going through those programmatic considerations so that you're meeting the needs of the company or other group that you're applying WQBA for, and then also so that you're ensuring that the final results are reasonable. Okay, and with that, we'll jump in. So the first step is understanding and defining the local context. So why must we do this? Although water quality is a global issue, a global problem, I should say, there's really nuances at the local level. And so even in 2 basins that are adjacent to each other, you might have very different water quality impairments in situations. So this particular process, what you should do is look to any available resources, and I provided an example here in the middle from something nearby. The Finnish-Norwegian River Basin District produced this document last year, and this particular figure illustrates the ecological status of all these different water bodies throughout the basin. And so what you might do in this first step is look to documentation like this, look to the areas that are classified as perhaps moderate or poor or even bad ecological status, and then look to what that particular guidance document says is causing those impairments. Are there certain pollutants that are resulting in that poor ecological status? And even more importantly, what are the causes, the root causes of those impairments so that you can better understand how actions on the ground can be implemented to improve the water quality and the potential root causes of those actions and magnitude. Okay, the second step in the process is defining the project activities, objectives, and partners. And really what we found in our experience in volumetric water benefit accounting is communication with the project partners or implementers is really key. You need to do it throughout the entire VWBA or WQBA process. so that there's clear lines of communication, clear understanding of what the on-the-ground activities are and what the project objectives are. In this table on the right, we've listed a selection of activities across the categories that Sarah mentioned: agricultural, urban, and natural landscapes or rangelands that are known to have water quality benefits. And so these particular activities were compiled from both the VWBA guidance document as well as other documentation on nature-based solutions. And one of the things I want to emphasize here as well, so not just knowing what the activity is, but also understanding the processes involved in the function of that activity. And I like to use regenerative agriculture as an example, right? We've maybe heard about that a lot this week in different sessions. It's a very important initiative or types of programs, but regenerative agriculture can mean a lot of different things to different people in different geographies or just different agricultural settings, right? So we want to know a little more in this process. We want to have a clear understanding of what are the on-the-ground activities that are being implemented as part of a regenerative agricultural program, for example, so that then it can lead us to an appropriate method selection and choosing the right inputs and assumptions so that we best represent the potential water quality benefits of regen ag. Okay, so after completing those very important first two steps, we arrive at this middle step, maybe the fun part of gathering the data and inputs, compiling your assumptions, picking a method, and computing the water quality benefits. And when we do this, most often we're going to have two different conditions that we evaluate. The first is the pre-project condition, or sometimes this is called the without project condition. This represents either current conditions or a baseline degraded, impaired, or otherwise undesirable water quality state. And then the second is a post-project condition or desired future condition where water quality is improved, okay? And then often the difference is your water quality benefit. And Sarah mentioned these, so the 5 water quality pollutant categories that we determined are most important in conversations with our corporate partners and that advisory group were sediment, nutrients, mainly nitrogen and phosphorus, bacteria, temperature, and metals. And the draft water quality indicators that we have at this point are reduced pollutant load, avoided pollutant load, percent pollutant concentration reduction, average temperature reduction, or peak temperature reduction. Okay, so this slide has a lot of text on it. It might be hard to read, and I'm not going to go through all of it in detail, but what I want to emphasize here, like you might have seen in the outline, is that the WQBA guidance document is going to be structured very much like the volumetric guidance document in that we have developed a separate appendix for each of the methods. It's roughly 3 to 5 pages in length, and it goes into a detailed description of the method, the activities, indicators, and applications where it's most appropriately applied, the required inputs, and then the equations used to go through that benefit quantification calculation, an illustrative example, and then any references that a practitioner might want to refer to for more information. And so what we did in this slide is develop this summary table that you can use to help kind of expedite that method selection process. So this is just a subset of the content that the whole guidance document will have. And with that, we have 7 different methods listed here. And the intent of these methods is to be relatively robust, but also easy to apply. We can't have methods that are so complex or time-consuming to apply that they inhibit progress in quantifying the water quality benefits. And that's a very similar approach taken in the VWBA guidance document. The first is the pollutant reduction efficiency method. And this one's relatively simple. You compile a unit area loading rate for your pollutant, and that's usually in a mass per year, such as metric tons per hectare per year, and also a percent reduction factor by which that pollutant load is reduced by the particular activity. The second is the modified simple method. This uses rainfall or runoff coefficient and event mean concentration for the pollutant, and this is often applied in urban runoff or stormwater type projects. The third is the universal soil loss equation. You might have heard of this. It's an empirical model that takes into account several different factors. It's often applied on agricultural landscapes, primarily to estimate soil erosion with adoption of different conservation practices, but you can also use it with sediment-bound pollutants if you if you have a concentration attached to the sediment for that. Fourth is the treatment system method, and this is very analogous to the volume treated method in VWBA. For those of you familiar with that, it applies mass balance principles for a certain type of practices, intercepting type BMPs, where you have some pollutant load coming in, the intercepting BMP treats it and removes some portion of that load, and then a lesser load going out. The fifth is water quality monitoring. So this can be a little more advanced, but this is where you're actually implementing some type of monitoring program designed to measure the improvements in water quality after the project has been implemented. So again, in this situation, it could either be large-scale projects that are maybe thousands of hectares, and you could actually measure at a small stream that's impacted by the entire drainage area that the activity is implemented on. Or similar to the treatment system method, it can also apply to practices with a clearly defined inlet and outlet where you can install your monitoring equipment and measure the differences or improvements in water quality. Sixth is a modeling method, and this is a bit of a catch-all and can involve very simple empirical or regression type modeling approaches or more complex mechanistic field scale or watershed scale models that can be applied to all sorts of landscape and all sorts of pollutants, but there might be situations where it is cost effective to use a modeling based approach to estimate the water quality benefits, or in situations where it might be just required by the local program, such as a water quality trading program. And then the last one we call the region-specific method. So this involves the use of a credible or established tool or method that's been locally adopted for the purpose of estimating water quality benefits relative to the pollution problem. And again, in the Chesapeake Bay Assessment Tool, if you're familiar with the USA, is a great example of this, where there's already decades of modeling that went into understanding nitrogen and phosphorus pollution loaded to the particular water body, and the entities there developed this tool that can be used for all sorts of estimations of best management practice effectiveness for nitrogen and phosphorus. And one last thing to make on this slide is, as you can see, we chose not to be overly prescriptive with the matching of methods to particular activities, to particular indicators and pollutants, right? So the matrix on the right shows that most of these methods can apply to 4 or 5 of the different pollutant categories. And the reason for that is, in our experience in working in water quality, there's not really a one-size-fits-all situation. It's up to the person applying WQBA to use their professional judgment in which method they can apply, right? So there's a little bit of flexibility here and not rigidity. All right, moving on to the fourth step in the process, the determination of and allocation of water quality benefits. So at this particular step, you're dividing the total water quality benefits across the project partners, and ideally that's based on some previously agreed upon arrangement before the activities take place. So the programmatic considerations that are involved in this step include that project eligibility and selection consideration, any principles for making the credible WQ benefit claims, as well as the principles for tracking and reporting water quality benefits. And this particular section of the WQBA guidance document is certainly a work in progress. And so I want to highlight here, take a step to introduce that there is a parallel effort going on right now called VWBA 2.0, where a group is updating the volumetric water benefit accounting in these 4 topic areas, and that's being conducted in 4 different installments. And the first 2 topic areas listed here, those installments are already complete, and hopefully we'll be releasing the documents within the coming months. The third installment is also nearing completion, and then the 4th installment is underway. So the idea of introducing this here is, like I said early on, WQBA is meant to be very aligned with the VWBA in terms of the principles, the programmatic considerations, right? So we're going to be developing the content for WQBA for this particular section in parallel with that VWBA 2.0 effort. Okay, finally, the 5th and final step in this process is ensuring the reasonableness of results. So this is a little different in that we decided to explicitly list this as a 5th step. Again, just based on our experience in water quality monitoring or modeling, not necessarily in a water stewardship setting, But we believe that you need to carefully and critically evaluate the water quality benefit quantification results to avoid overstating the benefits or mischaracterizing the benefits. Water quality is a relatively complex topic, and therefore there's different factors that you need to do in this fifth step. One of those is just comparing against any information or data that you have to make sure that both your baseline condition and your incremental benefit are reasonable if that's available. That might be looking to different reports or literature. You might also seek expert advice from another water quality expert within your organization or externally. And another simple thing to do is just apply some common sense checks. And we listed these in the table that you see on the left. So both bounding type checks and comparability type checks. And what we mean by that, using the photo here, you see thinking about sediment or soil erosion. One of the simple things you could do is just compute your metric tons of soil loss per hectare per year to a depth on the landscape, right? So does it amount to a millimeter, a centimeter, 10 centimeters, more than that? And that's an easy way to say, well, is that really realistic? Maybe in certain concentrated pathways, like in this photo, you could lose an inch of soil a year, but over that entire field, that might be a bit unreasonable. And another similar check would be to look at the percent reduction, right? Is our particular activity resulting in just a 1 or 2% reduction in pollutant load? Is that too little and understating the benefits, and vice versa if it's too high? And so lastly, as an example of that in this plot in the bottom right, that's from some work that I did with some colleagues in the highlands of Ethiopia, where we developed a tool called the WBC, or Water Benefit Calculator, to estimate the volumetric and sediment benefits of different agricultural conservation practices. And so one of the things we did was look to the academic literature and found 3 different studies where there were on-ground research in Ethiopia in very similar settings that measured sediment yields or sediment erosion. And so we wanted to make sure that the results predicted by our tool in that baseline condition were consistent with those literature-based sources. All right, and with that, I'll hand it to Nabia to go through some example applications.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Derek. Thank you, everybody, for coming to this session today. So I'm Nabia Ofosuama, Senior Corporate Engagement Advisor focused on water and resilience at the Nature Conservancy, and I will share a few case studies that show how we're starting to apply this. So first, we looked to the corporate partners that are part of this work and asked for any case studies that they have where they've seen water quality benefits being generated. And we received 17 case studies for consideration and ended up selecting 4 of those to move into more in-depth case studies. The selection was based on having a diversity of companies, so seeing kind of different approaches to this, also a diversity of geographies and project types as well. So we selected 4 case studies, as I mentioned, from Starbucks, Google, Cargill, and the Coca-Cola Foundation in the US, Colombia, and the United Kingdom. So I'm just going to share a very wordy slide that will showcase what all of these different case studies, and I'll go into each in more depth. But we looked at the location of the project, the problem that project was trying to address, the different drivers for these organizations in doing this project, the activities the project supported, the different pollutants of interest, the indicators, and then also the methods that were used to calculate the water quality benefit. So you can see here there were some similarities in the pollutants, looking both at sediment and nutrients as being of interest for all of these case studies, and then reduced pollutant load being the common indicator across all of them. So the first case study I'll go through is from Cargill. This took place in the Mississippi River Basin in the United States, where there is nutrient loading primarily from agricultural runoff. So you can see here a photo of the Gulf of Mexico area in the United States, where there is low oxygen levels in the Gulf resulting from all of that nutrient loading coming down the Mississippi River. Cargill was interested in this project because this river is a critical sourcing region for them. They were also focused on greenhouse gas reduction and looking to improve soil health for their producers. And so to address that, they undertook some no-till agricultural practices and no-till, reduced-till practices, as well as putting cover crops on these specific locations. Nitrogen was the pollutant that was most addressed, and then again looking at the reduced pollutant loading of nitrogen, and they used a mechanistic field scale modeled approach, the APEX model, to calculate the estimated water quality benefit. The next case study is from Google. This took place in the Tuolumne River Basin in California in the United States. The water quality problem was sediment loading from vegetation loss due to wildfire. So you can see here some images of the terrain. On the left side of that picture, you can see what it looked like before and after wildfire. And so once that wildfire came through this area, there was a lot of sediment that was washing into the river. The driver for Google was around this area being an important freshwater source for their operations and also looking to receive a volumetric benefit in terms of the amount of water going back into the system. So they undertook activities around clearing and planting those tree seedlings and natural regeneration in these areas that were impacted by wildfire. And so we're looking to address the sediment issues, what's the reduced sediment load, and they used the pollutant reduction efficiency method. Next is a case study from Starbucks. This took place in the Magdalena River Delta and the Cienega Grande in Santa Marta, Colombia. The water quality problem was looking at runoff, sediment, and phosphorus loading caused by deforestation and agricultural activities. So again, some images here of the terrain in this area. This was an area that was an important sourcing region with coffee farmers in the location, and they were also looking to see a volumetric water benefit through this work. So they undertook agroforestry activities with their producers, landscape restoration, agricultural conservation activities, and looked to see that reduction of sediment and phosphorus in this area. And they used the universal soil loss equation for calculating the reduced pollutant load. And then lastly, a case study from the Coca-Cola Foundation. This took place in Richmond Park in London in the United Kingdom. This is more of an urban area, so there were sediment, oils, and heavy metals that were coming from urban runoff. And their focus here was a volumetric benefit related to their replenish goal. So what they did here was install a sediment trapping chamber called the downstream defender, and you can see that on the right, to trap the sediment as it was running off from the land. And they focused on sediments and heavy metals as the pollutants that could be estimated. So using that reduced pollutant load as the indicator. And here they decided to use the treatment system method, so looking at kind of the inlet, the outlet of this sediment trapping chamber to see that change in water quality. Okay, so some of the key takeaways from those 4 case studies. The first is that water quality benefit accounting can apply in diverse contexts. So we saw urban, we saw different countries. So also an interest in seeing increased diversity, but at least we've started with these 4, seeing some different contexts of where this could apply. This also touches on the point that Derek made earlier that multiple methods could have applied in some cases. So in the Coca-Cola Foundation case, for example, they're looking at the inlet and the outlet. They also were doing some monitoring of the stream in that location, so they could have selected a different method. So it really depends on what information is available for the person doing this work to identify which method to apply. We also saw that water quality is often a significant co-benefit from initiatives with other drivers. So many of these companies were focused on that volumetric benefit and also carbon as an entry point, but then seeing that there could also be a water quality benefit that could be quantified was important for these companies. Next, as I mentioned, reduced pollutant load was a key indicator in these case studies. And so that was something that we knew going in from talking to the companies that sediment pollution and also nutrients would be critical areas to focus on. But it also aligns with other initiatives. So there's the Science Based Targets Network that has focused on reducing pollutant loads, looking at sediment and nutrients as the starting point. So seeing that that's one area where we could begin to take this analysis further. In addition, we want to look for additional case studies from Africa, Asia Pacific, and a wider diversity of geography. So we did have some diversity on the map, but not all areas of the globe represented. So if people have case studies that they'd like to share, we'd be interested in seeing those from other locations. And then also looking at an interest from some of the case studies in direct water quality monitoring and also supporting surveillance to ground truth the benefit duration. So what I mean there is that some of this is just estimating what that benefit could be, but some of these companies were also interested in seeing, could we put some monitoring stations in there to see directly what's happening in the water bodies? And also, if we think this benefit is going to last 3 years, 5 years, can we continue to monitor over time and see how long this sort of benefit is lasting from some of these programs? And then lastly, there was also interest in recognizing additional co-benefits. So some of them starting with volumetric or carbon, then identifying water quality as a benefit, and then also thinking, could we look at soil health or biodiversity or habitat benefits or additional carbon sequestration benefits that could also be quantified? So lots of opportunities to link to all the benefits that water stewardship projects can bring. So with that, we'll move to the panel discussion. And I'm happy to answer questions on the case studies, but our panelists can also do so as we move into the Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you, Nabia, for kind of framing the applications of these methods. We heard from Sarah to kind of give us a frame of reference for why these methods and guidance are needed. We heard from Greg to kind of give us a really granular look at the methods and what's to come, and Nabia kind of grounded it in what's going on the ground. So I'd love to now hear from our panelists. If you could join me in these nice chairs. And I'll stay standing for now, so if you guys just want to fill in on the chairs, and I believe if you're within the tables, you're in view for online. There you go. If we could just have Ashley up as well. All right, great. Greg, yeah. So let's all get to know each other a little bit better. If we could just start with, from the companies, some introductions, your company's importance with regards to why you are engaging in water stewardship around water quality, and then we'll move to Greg to frame it in the wider corporate water stewardship sphere. Ashley, if we could start with you.
Sure. Hi, everyone, and sorry I can't be there in person this year. Hope it's been a good event. I'm Ashley McKeon. I sit as Director of Regenerative Agriculture for Cargill in our Global Impact Group. Most of you probably are familiar with Cargill, but if you're not, just really quickly, we're a large agribusiness company. We have 160,000 employees across 70 countries, and really our role is connecting farmers with markets. We provide downstream customers with critical food ingredients and feed ingredients to help serve people and animals across the food and agriculture value chain. A key part of Cargill's purpose is really nourishing the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. And as part of those sustainability commitments, we do have corporate goals around addressing climate change, focused on land use, water, which is the focus, of course, today, and around our people. For water, and specifically our interest kind of here is we have really over the last couple of years and launched in 2020, taken a real local context-based approach to water stewardship, where we really wanted to focus our efforts where it could have the greatest impact based on the specific water challenges in the communities and supply sheds where we're sourcing. And so for us, we're really focused now on enabling that positive water impact in kind of 3 key areas: our operations, our communities, but also our supply chains. And I think where we want to focus today, and the case study that was mentioned, is really our approach, we think is somewhat unique, in particular in the food and ag sector, is that we are going beyond our own operational footprint and extending to the communities and supply sheds where we're operating. As an ag company, most of our supply chain is from farming and ranching, and so focusing there is a critical endeavor for us. And specifically, our context-based goals around water stewardship in our supply chains are to enable the restoration of 600 million liters and reduction of 5,000 metric tons of water pollutants in water-stressed sourcing regions by 2030. And as we'll get into more, one of the key ways that we're doing this is sort of through regenerative agriculture and improving kind of the soil health on farms in those key supply sheds and watersheds.
Thank you, Ashley. So now would love to hear from Christina and Starbucks and kind of your impetus for joining this effort.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone in the room. Good morning, afternoon, evening to those online. My name's Christina Babbitt. I work for Starbucks. Most of you probably know Starbucks as a coffee company, which we indeed are, but we also like to think of ourselves as a people company. So as a company, our mission is to nurture the human connection, one cup, one conversation, one community at a time. And so that's really the lens that we take as we approach our water stewardship work. As a coffee company, we purchase 3% of the world's highest quality Arabica coffee from 460,000 farmers in 30 countries around the globe. So we know firsthand how connected our future is with the people and the places that we work. So in 2021, we expanded our water stewardship goal to take a more holistic approach. So we're focusing on reducing our water footprint or conserving our water footprint by 50% by 2030 within our store operations, within our packaging, within our coffee processing, as well as our agricultural value chain. And so we prioritize this work through different replenishment activities, wash initiatives on the ground, and we really look at the most at-risk basins to prioritize where we work. And when we approach these areas, we think from the very beginning, what are the water quality objectives, water quantity objectives, community objectives, and that's what guides the path that we take as we move forward.
Thank you, Christina. So we've heard from agriculture, we've heard from beverages. Now I would love to hear Google's thinking from Ashley, or from Anna, about kind of the tech sector's thinking around water quality.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me well? Good morning, good afternoon, good middle of the night, depending on where you are globally. Thank you so much for having me today here. I'm very excited to be part of this work. So, again, my name is Anna Square, and I am the lead of carbon and water in the global sustainability team at Google. Google's mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. So how does this mission translate into our sustainability strategy and into our water strategy? So from a sustainability strategy standpoint, our strategy is grounded in making information accessible and driving innovation through our products and platforms that billions of people engage with on a daily basis. By helping individuals, businesses, and other organizations, we can enable them making decisions that drive positive change for them, for the people, and for our planet. So our sustainability work is focused on 3 pillars. Empowering individuals, so it's how we empower everyone to make the sustainable choice, the easiest choice. Working together with our partners and customers, and this is a great example of how we're working with our partners, very valued partners, to advance sustainability. And then operating our business sustainably. I want to highlight the fact that our technology, the way that we interact with people, is at the core of our sustainability strategy, and we see our operating our business sustainably almost as table stakes that we all need to do. We believe we have a unique opportunity that really extends beyond managing our environmental footprint, and that's through our technology. We had a panel on technology earlier this week. Hopefully you enjoy that. And so now, how does this translate into water? So for us, water has been at the core of our company for a very, very long time. And in 2021, we announced our commitment to water stewardship. So our goal is to replenish 120% of the fresh water that we consume on average across our data centers and offices, and help restore and improve the health of the ecosystems and the health and the quality of the water for those communities that we depend on. So I'll tie back a little bit more into this responsible water use and replenishment. But again, 3 pillars for our water strategy. I feel that everyone has 3 pillars in everything that they do. So our 3 pillars for water strategy are responsibly using the water that we consume in our data centers and offices, benefiting watersheds and communities, and supporting water security with technology. So again, we believe that at Google, as a technology company, the biggest opportunity we have is around technology. But tying it back to how we think about benefiting watersheds and communities, I think similarly to all of my panelists here and many companies on the room, we really tie our water stewardship strategy depending on risk and the local context. So we will go source projects on replenishment, but also on watershed health. For me, this watershed health piece of our strategy is quite important because we're not only focusing on how much water we replenish based on the water that we consume, based on the local context, but also what are the shared water challenges that we're facing in the watersheds where we operate, the watersheds that we depend on for our own operations. And that's where quality and many other watershed health issues come to play. So we want to replenish the water in water stress areas, but we also want to influence quality. What we have found is that the standards behind how you quantify all of these things are not there yet. There's been a lot of progress done, which is amazing and fantastic, but there's more work to do. And so I think it's extremely important to advance the work on standards, to be able to quantify the benefits of all of those projects that we're all investing on. And then I think it's also important to be able to quantify the co-benefits that all of these projects have. So for instance, we talked about the project that we have in one of our catchment areas in California, and for us, one of the primary drivers was volume, because that's a scarcity region where we have our headquarters, but that project had tremendous co-benefits on quality, and we really want to quantify those. And we're seeing that across our portfolio, where we want to really be able to talk about all of the different benefits that the projects have. And Nabia, you finished, where are you? You finished with a nugget on what is the nature implication of the project, or other co-benefits, carbon, etc. So that's also top of mind for us.
Still on? There it is. So you touched on really important topics, the collective action and healthy water on the ground in basins and basin health. So I would love to now hear from Madhu and the Coca-Cola Company's perspective on water quality and how you're infusing those values into your strategy as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Madhu Rajesh from Coca-Cola. I lead the work on water and sustainable agriculture at Coca-Cola, and it's great to be here with all of you today. Thank you for joining us from different parts of the world and different time zones. Coca-Cola, as you know, is a beverage company, and water is our main and first ingredient, and so the company does depend a lot on availability of good quality water for our use, and therefore water has been a focus for our sustainability work for a very long time. In 2021, we launched our 2030 water security strategy, which has a vision of helping increase water security everywhere that we operate, where we source our ingredients from, and in communities where we touch people's lives. So really important area of work for us. How do we look at water stewardship? Similar to what we've heard from other panelists, we look at water stewardship within our operations and outside of our operations. And so within our operations, we look at all our facilities and exposure to water risk using a number of internal and external tools to assess vulnerability of water source and segment those facilities based on exposure to water risk into high, medium, low. We have a goal of 100% regenerative water use across 175 of our highest risk water facilities across the globe. When we talk about regenerative water use, what that means is we look at reducing the amount of water we use. We look at treating the wastewater to the required standards before we discharge it, and replenishing through a range of watershed and community programs the balance of the water. So looking at watersheds and communities is a very important part of our work. We also have a goal of helping promote watershed stewardship in 60 watersheds that have been identified as most critical for our operations as well as for our agricultural supply chains. And that's where we work with partners like the Nature Conservancy, WWF, and a number of other partners to really understand the needs of that local context and help implement watershed stewardship programs linked with the local context, whether that's water quality or agricultural programs, depending on if it's a sourcing region or nature-based solutions, range of interventions. And again, with communities, communities are a very, very important part of our work because we want to be good citizens in the communities we operate in, and therefore looking at community issues, whether it's access to water and sanitation or ability for communities to adapt to climate resilience and support with disaster relief. They're all integral components of our work. Our overarching goal is to replenish every drop of water that is used for in our finished beverages. And so between 2021 and 2030, the goal is to replenish a cumulative total of 2 trillion liters of water over the 10-year period. So that's what we're working towards. But the replenishment volumes come through a range of programs that we've been speaking about here that all have volumetric water benefits. Both the Coca-Cola Foundation and the Coca-Cola system, that's the company, and our bottling and our bottlers have a history of supporting a number of projects that have multiple benefits. And one of the key learnings for us from having had several hundred projects in the portfolio is that many of these projects have a lot of co-benefits, water quality being one of them. And we see that coming through partner reports from the learnings we get on the ground. But so far, there hasn't been a structured methodology or a way of quantifying these benefits. And so I'm really excited about this collaboration that we have here to develop this methodology that will help us assess the impact of the projects. And I guess the other thing is that it would, we are here with peers and a number of companies working on similar issues. So hopefully that lends itself to opportunities for collective action, which is really the way forward, because no one company can help, implement large-scale changes that's needed on the ground. So collective action with peer companies, with governments and stakeholders is really needed. And water quality will hopefully be key to it.
Thank you, Madhu. So we've now heard from 4 companies who are really interested in these methods to kind of figure out how to calculate co-benefits from water quality as well. And now would love to hear from Greg, who is a part of our technical advisory group and coming at it from a sort of different angle from the NGO perspective. So would you please introduce yourself, your organization, and kind of how these methods will support your existing work?
Great. Thank you, everybody, for attending, for those around the world that are joining us today. My name is Greg Brull. I'm a senior researcher with the Pacific Institute, and the other hat that I wear is the CEO Water Mandates Technical Lead. So within both of those pieces of work, water quality is central to the general tenets of our work. The Pacific Institute is a water think tank based in Oakland, in California, where we try and move the needle in driving catalytic water change or catalytic action towards driving the resilience agenda. The CEO Water Mandate is an organization of the United Nations Global Compact that is an assembly of the world's most forward-thinking companies. We have around 240 companies that are endorsing the CEO Water Mandate, and we really are helping push the needle there in getting companies to collectively work around water quality, water quantity, and WASH, and a variety of other programs and projects as well. I also lead our nature-based solutions work within the Pacific Institute and CEO Water Mandate. And this piece of work is key around really moving that needle to getting us to where we need to be from a standardized approach and helping partner organizations, either companies or governments or NGOs, in really building the agenda around resilience and water quality movements. So the key piece of work that I'd like to speak around today is our flagship project, Net Positive Water Impact, within the CEO Water Mandate. And water quality fits squarely within one of our key pillars, as well as the 3 dimensions of water across water quality, water quantity, and wash. So this piece of work is fundamental to really helping move our own programs and supporting our own corporate partners as well in helping them reach their objectives around the 3 dimensions of water.
Thank you. So would love to bring it back to the corporate funders. This guidance is coming out in the first quarter of 2024. It will be open source, usable for anyone. My question is, why and what value did you see in funding this? Obviously, for it to be open source, we need core funders to make that happen. Why did you want to be a part of that? And Ashley, if you would love to kick us off.
Sure. And probably what I'll say is sort of pulling out a lot of strings that the rest of the panelists highlighted. For us, as we said, we set these goals in 2020. Cargill as a company is committed to addressing both the water quantity and water quality in our regions. But what we all know and have acknowledged here is that the volumetric space is much further along. And so I think what we know is many more companies have set goals on water quantity because there is a more standardized guidance and approach. And I think what we have found for water issues in general, but specifically water quality, right? These are such shared local challenges that more stakeholders and players need to be involved. In water quality, a lot of governments, a lot of local communities have action, but often the business role or sort of the influence we can have through our supply chains may be more lacking. And the importance of getting a standardized approach to accounting for this, such as these methods discussed today, I think can really help move forward not only the ability to count kind of water quality as a co-benefit or a main benefit of projects, but also hopefully enabling more companies to set targets specific to water quality. And I think what we see where we sit in the supply chain as Cargill, right, is there's a lot of pressure around things like carbon, increasingly around volumetric water, which is good. But when we're trying to kind of work with farmers on how do we improve soil health, how do we improve your system to reduce nutrient use, having targets that companies are focused on further downstream helps drive more incentive for farmers to make that change as well, right? And we want to drive more value and more focus so that this is something that makes not just good environmental sense for a grower, but also good economic sense, right? Through incentives and motivated markets. And so I think having this methods out there so we can start testing and using and learning in real time, right? Through these pilots and expanding our projects will, I think, drive not only the quality of projects, but also hopefully targets that can bring even more market demand kind of for these positive changes in the farm gate, at least for our supply chain.
Thank you. Yeah, I would love to hear maybe from a company that sources agricultural products now. So if Christina, I could turn it to you.
Yeah, and I think there's probably going to be a lot of similarities in the themes and the responses that you hear, so I'll try to be additive. When we think of water, it's not water quality or quantity. They are intricately related, right? So you need sufficient quantities of water, and you need to understand what quality you need for what purpose. Are we thinking of drinking water quality? Are we thinking water quality for agriculture that, you know, supports the commodities that we grow? And so when I think about this approach, I think for companies, it makes it easier to consider that holistic approach from the start. So yes, standards for volumetric benefits, but then water quality isn't so scary, right? There's a, thank you. There's a way, I hope that wasn't the whole time. You guys put me in the right direction. But I think it's also about understanding then how you can move the needle when it comes to quality, right, in that interconnected way. And, you know, similarly, it's a standardized approach, right? So companies can leverage the approach and they can report out of the approach across all of the projects they do in a systematic way so that we know that there's consistency in how we're measuring and then reporting out to our stakeholders.
Yeah, and then Madhu, I'll turn to you, a similar beverage industry proposition. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, sure. And I think Christina and Ashley have covered a lot of it. The only other thing I would say is that from my perspective, I see a lot of different projects and I see a lot of different conversations about, we need to work on regenerative agriculture, we need to work on nature-based solutions and, many, many different things. And from where I sit and looking at a lot of projects that we have and impact reports that are coming through, actually recognizing the interlinkages between between these projects and the various types of co-benefits that we have, and having a system that helps us capture these together would be very useful in designing better and more holistic projects so we can achieve the impacts we want to achieve without really thinking of these in silos. So that is key for me, that the role methodologies like these can help in breaking down silos. So turning to agriculture, which Ashley and Christina were talking about, there's a lot of conversation around regenerative agriculture at the moment. And when I look at water replenishment projects, a lot of the activities are around, let's say, reduction in the use of pesticides, reduction in use of chemical fertilizers, the shift to use of organic fertilizers and biochar and all those things that all improve soil quality and soil moisture, and actually reduce the pollutants in the water and therefore improve water quality. So really understanding end to end what is a good project that has these multiple benefits, and find a way of quantifying them and feeding that into future program design so that we have the same projects design better, design larger, and contributing to different sustainability goals that we have, and a method of measuring and reporting for external disclosures would be really helpful as we try and move the needle as quickly as we can.
Thank you. And Anna, I know we're all very nice people on this project team, and you'd love to give us so much money, but what was the impetus for Google in really wanting to fund this project?
Aside from working with an amazing group of people, which I 100% agree with, I second everything that has been said. For me, one big thing is speaking a common language. When there's no methodologies that we all adhere to, we're all kind of forced, quote unquote, to do our own accounting, set up our own methodologies. And at the end of the day, you'll be speaking about the same project, because a lot of these projects end up being collective action, all of us working together to implement these projects. But if there's not a common standard, there's no common language, there's no common metrics. And so we're part of the stakeholders in most of these watersheds. And we might be upstream or downstream from you, we might be collaborating in these projects, but we don't have a common language to speak to, then it becomes really challenging to agree on what are the measures that need to be taken, what are the objectives, how are we going to improve the quality of the watershed, and depending on the indicator or depending on the stressor that we're seeing in that specific location. So for us, this standardization is really big to bring all of those stakeholders together and ensure we're all speaking the same language.
Thank you. So Greg, you touched on this a little bit already, but could you help us kind of frame the importance, if you feel that it's important, of this guidance in the wider corporate water stewardship sphere?
Sure. So as has already been mentioned by a number of my co-panelists, volumetric benefits have often been at the forefront. And I think there's so many interconnections which have already been mentioned as well between volume and quality. But then if we expand that out as well, it's quality and biodiversity benefits. So again, these interlinkages that Anna's just mentioned now are going to be key components about how we think about this in a holistic way, which Madhu was talking about. From our side, it's around, again, supporting companies to get to where they need to be through a standardized approach, through these collective action initiatives in a way that makes sense for the bottom line. We hear time and time again that there are just too many approaches out there that either aren't standardized, aren't robust or defensible, and this piece of work really helps us get to where we need to be by moving that needle to something that is standardized, that is robust, defensible, based on credible science, and it's really needed. So,
thank you. Beyond this, and this question is for everyone, what is still needed within the corporate community to set quantitative quality and quantity targets, do you think? Anyone can jump in. I can shout you out if needed.
I mean, I think I'll say any methodology that we create needs to be simple and needs to be practical for companies to apply. And also, if we really want to have large-scale action across multiple companies and hundreds and thousands of projects, then it needs to be a model that lends itself to scale. So thinking about, yes, the methodology is open sourced, but if the application of the methodology sits in if that knowledge stays within 1, 2, 3, or 4 organizations, it's not going to be scalable. So how do we create tools and learning resources that truly make this an open source methodology is something that I'd like to challenge the group to think about. And then collective action. I think we're all working on overlapping watersheds, on similar issues, and the power is really in all of us coming together and working collectively. So those would be my 2 big things: going into basins, looking at end-to-end health, and seeing, rather than doing our small bits and silos, just coming together and saying, how do we transform this basin over the next few years?
And I would just add, when we think about water quantity, water quality, I think it's also important to think of the larger ecosystem and the people within the ecosystem, and so how these activities actually connect to people within those communities, and how we're actually improving livelihoods through improved water quality. So I think there's a lot of room on the social side of these metrics and making sure we see the bigger picture in the work that we're doing.
And maybe one more point for us, or the way that I see it is, how do we translate it into local action? What does it mean for each of the watersheds that are critical for our operations? And what are those context-based targets that we establish, but not individually as a company, but in the ecosystem or with the watershed partners and stakeholders that we're all interfacing every day? So that might mean getting together with partners in the watershed, with stakeholders in the watershed, and agreeing on what the common goals should be to move us forward. Maybe I'll say something I'll just go for it. I think there's a little bit of target fatigue in the corporate world. There's a target for carbon, and there's a target for water, and there's a target for quality of water, and there's a target for wash, and there's a target. I don't know how hard it is for all of you all to get those targets approved from your leadership. We certainly see a little bit of do we need another target? So maybe not elevating those targets into that corporate strategy, but translating into what does it really mean to take action and drive action in what it matters. And it might not mean having a watershed quality target sitting on top of our strategy that goes, at the highest speaking points on our strategies. I think it's how do we elevate those targets to drive action in the watersheds where we operate, and it might not have a direct translation into quality metrics, but translate it with your local partners and be able to agree on what the collective action is and what are the metrics that we're going to try to evolve and improve together.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. And Ashley, I would love to hear your thinking as well on kind of what is next beyond this guidance and what is needed.
Yeah, no, everything that the fellow panelists said really resonated for me too. Maybe it's interesting, Anna, your point about not, how do we think about it as a target? Because I think more than anything, is it a number? Do we need another commitment? I think that could be really openly discussed. But I think what we know is we do want to make sure it's a clear priority as part of a holistic water stewardship approach of companies, and this guidance will really enable that. And I think when we often are on the ground talking to farmers, water comes up all the time. Water is front of mind for farmers. And it's interesting as that we get further down the value chain, at least the last maybe decade, right, where it's sort of carbon and these bigger goals have sometimes taken precedence. And I think we need to remember, I think coming back to the people point, Christina, like you made, farmers are also these people, right, trying to do a business, and they live in the communities where water quality impacts are really clear. Water quantity, obviously with drought in the US happening this year and many other places, is front of mind. And so how do we kind of enable those needs that are really front of mind locally to be kind of carried through and incentivized throughout the whole supply chain? and for a company, not just kind of within your own four walls, but recognizing that larger extension, I think is going to be really important. And these methods hopefully can help at least drive that consistency that we all have been hoping for in how we kind of add value for that.
Thanks, and Greg, I'll give you the last word. Kind of what is needed to push the impact of this guidance beyond the paper and really drive next steps?
So for us, it's all around alignment. And a number of the speakers have spoken about how integrated this work is across all of their value chains, all of the key pieces of work that we're doing. So within the mandate, we consider ourselves to be thought leaders across many components, working with very clear partners across the corporate sector, across NGOs, across government, etc. So it's making sure that we embed this work as much as possible across a number of our flagship projects and programs to make sure that there's no more fatigue across another target, another standard, but it's rather embedded so that we're speaking the same language across all of our programmatic and project areas to make it flow as easily as possible and to really, again, push that needle to where we need to be.
Thank you. So I just wanted to thank all of the panelists, if we can do a round of applause for them. And you're all excused for your great work. You can just join in.
Thank
So
you
now
so
we're
much.
just I'll introduce Laura Weintraub. We're gonna do some polling and some Q&A that's really focused on answering your questions related to the methods and guidance.
Great, thank you, Caroline. So a big thanks to our project team. Sarah did a wonderful job teeing off the drivers for this work. Derek worked through the methodology, the technical backbone of this important initiative. And then Nabia showed how we're kicking the tires on this and we're testing the methodology. And then also our wonderful panelists explained the relevance and really the value that this work is going to provide for us. So what we wanted to do right now is hear a little bit from you. We want to understand, as this is still a work in progress and we'll be working towards refining the document and the methodology and releasing it later in early 2024. We've got a few questions that we want to hear from you on Slido, so there should be a QR code up there that you can snap on your phone, or if you're at home, perhaps just go right to the code on your computer. We've got 4 questions. The first one is pretty simple. Actually, is that the second question or the first? I think that jumped ahead, didn't it? Okay. Is that the first question? Yes. Okay, good. So with the water quality benefit accounting methodology, do you see any gaps, or is anything that we've shared with you unclear or not as straightforward as you feel that it should be? Time lags, that's a good point. Like to hear the all clears, that's great confirmation. Integration with SBTN, that's wonderful. I think many of us are going to race from this session off to that one after this concludes. Will it integrate with VWBA? Yes. As we mentioned before, as that process is in queue to be updated, we're looking towards how to really keep them aligned and really be parallel resources. Making generated data available, open data platform, good feedback. Connection to utility municipality water benefits. Yes, one of the things, this effort was really driven by the ag community, but one of the things that was really important to us is to recognize those urban green infrastructure type projects. So, all right, I think I'm gonna move on to the next question here, but really great feedback. Our team will be looking through these answers and we really appreciate that. So is this guidance applicable to your work, and why or why not? Yes, that's a great answer. We'll go with that. I think is this a I think it's a pie chart. We're getting a lot of yeses. Okay. Wow, still quite complex. Yes, it is a complex topic, and I think one of our initiatives here is to stick to the robust science, but not make it overly complex, so that really what we want to see is funding for those projects in the ground, not funding for a research level quantification of the water quality benefits. However, as Derek noted, we also want to be able to recognize in many watersheds there are existing models and there is existing research that we can build upon, and these methods will align with that. So really great to see that positive feedback. So keep pulling that in, or if you've got any other contradictory points, certainly we'll welcome those as well. Okay, so next question. Are the methods technically robust? So given what you were able to see today, Derek walked through a table kind of explaining the diversity of methods, the basis for them, which are many of the foundational water quality modeling elements, and yeah, any kind of immediate feedback on what you were able to see so far? Uncertainty is okay. Unsure, we haven't showed you everything under the hood yet as far as what these methods represent, but certainly some yeses there as well. Okay, great. And then we'll go on to the fourth question. This one I believe is open-ended. And this one we might want to take a few more minutes on so people can give it some thought. But as Derek said, we had to prioritize what pollutants, what types of landscapes and types of projects and activities that we would want to capture in we see as potentially the first phase of this work. With all of the work we do, there's always opportunity for additional improvements and funding and to extend work as we move. But what are the additional methods, pollutants, or activities from what you can see that were not necessarily included in this first phase, but might be of strong interest in the future? So we see some pesticides, BOD, metals. Let's just start here. I like that. Let's use what we've got and keep moving forward. Emerging contaminants. That's something that did come up in our early days working on this project and felt that a lot of it was so diverse with the number of pollutants, we wanted to maybe table that for the moment until we could get some clarity on what would be most relevant. PFAS, yep, that's one that's certainly front of mind for many people in the world right now working on water. So, fantastic. Okay, well, I think the poll is probably still open for those that want to provide additional feedback, and thank you so much for providing some of that information that we can use as we bring this project towards the finish line and towards publication. So I think we have maybe about 5 more minutes along those lines. We would like to open it up for Q&A. I don't know if there's a roaming microphone here, if there's anyone in the live audience here that has a question they'd like to ask, particularly for our project team, but if there's something that you're curious about, that would be great. Got some hands in the back there. And I might welcome our project team to come on up, who might be able to assist with answering some of these questions. That'd be great.
Hi, thanks for that. My question is actually for the corporate partners, but anyone can answer. I'm just wondering how, with all of this work, when you're considering investments to meet your targets, how you do think about both time lags, I asked the time lags question, and also whether or not sort of build in redundancy given increasingly stochastic landscape between droughts and floods and sort of setting targets 10 years out and being able to sort of account for that uncertainty in the system.
So the question is focused more on target setting? Is that, I'm sorry if you could rephrase, is it the application of water quality benefit accounting or?
Well, like when you are leading towards water quality targets, you're not going to reach them right away by doing an activity. There's going to be time lags in the system. And because there's time lags in the system to achieve those goals, there's also uncertainty around extreme weather events and things that could derail those goals. So both thinking, how do you factor in time lags when you're doing this work? And also, how are you building in, I guess, a redundancy to be able to sort of think about the uncertainty in the system? Yeah.
Okay. I guess do any of our partners want to speak to those targets setting process? Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Can you?
I think it's working. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for the question. So, great question, and that's exactly how we plan our portfolio. So, we worked to develop a portfolio of projects. You contract at X point of time. It's going to take 2-3 years sometimes for those projects to come online. So at the end of the day, speaking for our program, we have a glide path of how we're going to get to 2030 with our commitments. And so you start building projects. Once you contract them, they get into your dashboard, into your glide path, and you start building up those projects who in turn have a certain amount of years in which you're going to get benefits from those projects. So you build that stacking of projects, and then every project you have the forecasted benefit, and then you have a range of uncertainty. So you do have to build redundancy in the system. There's some projects that are not going to work out. There's some projects that depend on rainfall. There's projects that depend on the partnering delivering. So there is the need to build on redundancy because otherwise it's likely that you don't meet your goal. And so that's how we are doing it. We're planning that redundancy in the portfolio. We're planning on the time lag that it takes for those projects to come online, and that's part of how we are operationalizing the target.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from the audience up there? Caroline, do you want to see maybe Michael Alexander there? That's great. Yep.
Hi, it's Michael from Diageo here. Just firstly, congratulate everybody for the work, and it's fantastic and very timely and welcome. So I've really enjoyed the session, and recognition to the corporates for funding this as well. I think it's really, really important work. So thank you for that. And it's really encouraging to see the alignment with VWBA. That's pretty obvious, but we need to be keeping it simple, but not taking any shortcuts. So I think that's great. And I would reiterate Madhu's comment about integrating it with the Regen Ag and seeing this as a Regen Ag tool as much as a water tool or a nature tool. We haven't talked that much about the impact on nature and how we're using this tool as a measure to improve or reduce our impact on nature through ag. The one missing for me, it may be obvious, but what were the results? So I'm assuming that the results are going to be published in the January or first quarter of next year, and it'd be really interesting that. We haven't had a chance to look at the results. Obviously, it's early days, but that will say a lot, and I look forward to seeing that. I'm seeing a few nodding faces, so that's great. Thank you for that. And I suppose my question is really around expectation. So in 2019, in the VWBA, it really led to a lot of uptake on water volume commitments from corporates, which was great. We know it's got its shortfalls, VWBA, but it's a great tool to generate action. And that's what we need, and we now need action on water quality and measuring that. So is the expectation that corporates will move, similarly as they did for replenishment and VWBA, using this methodology to move to public commitments? I understand the comment about too many targets, but we all know targets mean action, and this is a really good methodology for that. So I'm interested to hear from those on the panel and the corporates whether, I think only one of the 4 corporates currently has a water quality public target. So are the other 3 going to move to that? And what's the expectation of the panel, and is that seen as a good outcome? You have dozens and dozens of companies setting externally verifiable water quality targets.
Yeah, I'll speak to a couple points, Michael, that you made. First, yes, the results of the case studies will be published in the document in Q1. I think we'll be giving potentially even some more small case studies embedded if we can, along with those appendices. And I think as far as setting additional water quality targets, I certainly can't speak for any of our corporate partners and friends here where they'll go with that. I do see value in this, that whether or not an explicit or quantitative target is set, it opens windows for all of you practitioners to point to your leadership and say, hey, maybe we have this volumetric target that opened the gates of that funding and catalyzed work, but look, there's a methodology, we can quantify these water quality benefits. And for those projects that maybe have a first and foremost water quality driver, but have an extra volumetric component with it. And these are these watersheds where maybe scarcity risk isn't the biggest issue, but it is water quality, or it is, linked to agriculture. So what we're hoping is with this consistent methodology, it'll give you power to elevate the importance of this and put some tangible benefit quantification behind it, and it'll allow for those funds to flow and for that leadership buy-in. Whether or not targets are set, I think it's TBD. I think it depends on the industry. It depends how that looks. We continue to learn about what types of targets make the most sense. Sometimes a quantitative target isn't always the best target, and sometimes it is. So I'll welcome any other thoughts on that, but okay, great. Question right here.
Hi, Carla de las Casas with Brown & Cobble. Again, congratulations to everybody involved. I think this fills a much-needed gap that we had in the industry, and it's a great thing that you are filling this need for the industry. And my question is related to cost of implementation, because once you move into measuring something new, it's a cost that you're going to have to pass on to the partners. Sometimes they don't have the resources needed. I see perhaps an opportunity with the case studies to validate the results from the models or the other estimates, to do shorter timeframes for building on baselines and demonstrating that this is something that could be easily implemented for those companies with fewer resources. So I was just wondering for your next steps in terms of publishing the data, but also plans for extending these case studies into more showing the demonstration of how this could be really applied, widespread.
Anyone want to touch on that?
How WQBA could be more widely applied, is that what you mean? Or
Yeah. So there's the cost of the project implementation, but do you mean the cost of quantifying the benefits? Yeah. So these methods, similar to VWBA, are meant to be somewhat of a desktop exercise. So not hundreds of thousands of dollars to quantify the benefit, but something that is much lower lift than that. Now, as far as the monitoring, or if there's a more extensive modeling exercise behind it, I think that could vary dramatically, whether or not there's additional resources needed to do that on-the-ground verification.
And I think I failed to mention a third point actually early on, is that this is really meant to be complementary or supplemental to what's already been being done with the volumetric benefit quantification. So, you know, I by no means do we envision it's doubling the effort or anything like that. I think it's incrementally increased, or will be done alongside those early steps that we described. You know, those steps should already be conducted with a volumetric benefit quantification. So it's a good consideration, right? Does this just add more cost? But we really see it as complementary, I suppose, and some economies of scale as well, you know, when you're looking at a large portfolio of projects.
Some of the data inputs for the volume and the water quality accounting are the same, especially if it's like a runoff reduction methodology, and you're doing that curve number runoff, and some of the inputs drivers are going to be consistent.
I can also just quickly add as well that the case studies that we're looking at are mostly historic projects that were already completed, quantified from a volumetric perspective. So kind of retroactively applying what these methods looks like, or in places where there was a model that was already run. But I think there is an opportunity, as you're saying, to look at projects that are currently ongoing or getting started up, and kind of what is that process from start to finish with these methods. So that's why if you have additional case studies, if there are other companies that we could work with to see what does it look like for an implementer, what does it look like for the company, what does it look for like for an organization that may be doing the quantification to take this from start to finish. So I think it'll be a process of working through as the methods come out.
Sure. Yeah, I think one more would be great. Yep.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to present my appreciation for all this effort, because it's very important to have such type of technical documents which can help the technician at ground level. We don't have one globe, and we have to take care for all the things. So that that makes a good call for us. So thank you for the presentation, and also the work which has been done for technical persons. The other thing which I would like to suggest is one, to strengthen this teamwork with also other partners or companies which can take care for their social responsibility. So that's one. And the other is, if you can make up a team for backup questions and technical supports, that will be, I think, will make more sense for your effort, so that the technicians can get backup support for their questions, problems, and do get the target. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. So I think that was great. Sarah, do you want to close out this?
Yeah, I can close this out. And yeah, great suggestion. Thank you. I know these resources, we try to make them as user-friendly as possible, but there's always support that's needed. So good suggestion. We'll keep that in mind. Is it possible to get the last slide up?
Switch through, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide contact information because many of us will be darting out the door. So I'm sorry, some of us won't have time to stick around and chat. But thank you all so much for coming out this afternoon, this morning, whatever it is right now. And big thanks to our corporate partners, those of us who are here, those of you who are here in person, participating in the panel, and to Ashley, if you're still online, thank you for waking up at 4:30 this morning to join us virtually. Much appreciated. And to the rest of the project team, thanks very much. So if you do have any further questions, input, want to learn more, please do reach out. My email is here. You can track any of us down as well. And we'd love to continue the conversation. So thanks very much and have a good rest of your last day.